Hello, Tamarao. In this video, let's talk about factors in intercultural relationships. There are actually several which we need to consider. These are norms, roles, beliefs and values, gender, race, and class. So what is a norm? A norm is something which dictates if an attitude is acceptable or unacceptable within a society. So, for example, in the Philippines, right? When you have your reunion and then your tita says, alam mo, tumaba ka, you got fat. And then, actually, in our society, as a collectivist society, it's a norm. It is offensive to other people, but with Filipinos, it's a usual thing to do. Nowadays, we think and we're starting to realize that actually it's kind of rude to ask that or to say that. But back in the olden times, it was really acceptable because it was a norm. And based on our example, we also have to realize that norms change over time because what can be acceptable from before may not necessarily be acceptable in the present. The second factor to consider is the roles. A role is what function do you perform in your society. So a person may have several roles. So for example, you may be a student, a sibling, an offspring, maybe you are also a worker, a lover. So those are the roles that you have. Basically, what functions do you have in society? Then you have beliefs and values. In terms of beliefs and values, this also has to do with intercultural relationships because sometimes the beliefs and values they clash or they're too different and it sparks controversy and conflict. Gender is also another important factor to consider in intercultural relationships because each culture will have its own idea on what is acceptable for a certain gender to do. So, this is what we call the gender norms. For example, in the Philippines, we have a very macho society. So, normally, um, the men or the boys, when they meet their friends, they don't really touch all that much. They'll touch, but they'll hurt each other, right? Sometimes. But in some places, like for example in India, the men they kiss. Okay, they kiss each other, and that's a social thing. It's a friendly thing to them. But imagine if in the Philippines you do that, two men will kiss, they'll automatically be assumed as gay because it's not a norm with us. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay, but with us, we're very careful that if we don't want to be mistaken as gay, we avoid to do such things because that is not our norm. Likewise, in Korea, the men like touching each other, but to them it's not gay, it's just normal. It's an establishment of friendship. They call it the skinship. So the men will hug each other or they will sit and they have their arms linked or whatever and it's normal to them. So that's the idea with gender norms. It changes between cultures and it's also an important factor in intercultural relationship because these are things that we have to consider. For example, in the nursing profession, right? When you are already working, some cultures will be very wary that that person who will be assigned to you as a nurse should have the same gender orientation. But some countries, they don't care. It's interchangeable, right? So it really depends on the culture, and sometimes we have to adapt to such things, especially if we are the ones who are going to work abroad. Another factor to consider, and a very big factor at that, is race. Because different races have different ways of doing things. And given that, we also have to adapt into the situation. Okay? Some people will ask, to use honorifics. Usually in Filipino we have, and in most Asian countries there are honorifics, but in English speaking countries, sometimes they aren't. It's usually just ma'am or sir, but sometimes they just speak without these sort of things to indicate politeness, right? So, and then they base your politeness on the tone of your voice or the way you delivered your message. So again, we go back to the medium is the message for that one. Another thing to consider is class. Class meaning the differences between the people in society in terms of socio-economic capabilities. As much as we don't want to have that, it's a consideration when we have intercultural communication and relationship, because we also have to understand each other. We have to give space for our minds to process the situation of people who do not have the same class standing or who do not have the same socioeconomic capacity as us, whether they're poorer than us or economically challenged, or they're richer or economically privileged. So those are things that we have to consider as well.